Officer Michael Fanone, one of the hero police officers of January 6th, telling me tonight what he wants people to understand about that terrible day.
I want people to understand the significance of January 6th. I want people to understand that, thousands of rioters came to the Capitol hell-bent on violence and destruction and murder, and that 850 MPD officers responded there and really saved the day.
That as the President, Joe Biden, in just hours, set to deliver his first address to a joint session of Congress in the very room where those rioters tried to prevent him from becoming president. Biden expected to tout his pandemic response and push his jobs and infrastructure plans for the nation. Plus, the FBI announcing a civil rights investigation into the fatal shooting of Andrew Brown Jr. by North Carolina deputies last week, as CNN obtains new surveillance video of the moments leading up to the shooting. And the CDC issuing new guidance on what you can do. Fully vaccinated Americans can now go without a mask outside most of the time. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, John Harwood, and political analyst, Astead Herndon, to discuss a lot of issues, what's going to happen tomorrow, also the issue, the interview that I had last hour with the officer, Michael Fanone. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining. Astead, I want to play more from that interview with Officer Fanone about the insurrection. Watch this.
It's been very difficult seeing elected officials and other individuals kind of whitewash the events of that day or downplay what happened. Some of the terminology that was used, like hugs and kisses and, very fine people, is like very different from what I experienced and what my coworkers experienced on the 6th. I experienced a group of individuals that were trying to kill me to accomplish, their goal. And I think that, sorry, Don. Man, I didn't think I'd get this emotional. I experienced the most brutal, savage, hand-to-hand combat of my entire life.
President Biden is planning to reference the January 6th riot in his speech. This big lie is the backdrop, really. Speak to the significance of that. Instead, he's going to be delivering it, as Abby said earlier, basically at a crime scene.
Absolutely, and I think that's how we should continue to think about what happened on that day, and how we should think about the insurrection and the attempts to overthrow democracy. And what we're seeing is that moment you're showing from that officer is really one that speaks to how close it got on that day. And I don't think that's something that should be forgotten, but we should also know that the Republican officials involved, particularly those who are beholden to President Trump, have foregone their promises to back law enforcement, have foregone their promises to support police officers and Blue Lives Matter, all in the sake of their political means and their political goals. And I think that actually speaks to what those values actually were to them. It was not a real principled support of law enforcement. It was not a kind of more morally rigid stance from them. What they were doing was simply supporting them for the purposes of demeaning other social justice movements. Even now, you have Republicans talking about, it was Black Lives Matter in the crowd, it was Antifa in the crowd. That is not supported. That has not been proven by evidence. That is a lie, and we know that to be true. And if these Republican officials were following fact, that would be something that would be easy for them to admit. But we know that this is about a political aim that requires for them to be beholden to the former president and to be beholden to the lie that he helped spread.
John, do you think he will call out the Republicans who are doing the whitewashing, or is that not Joe Biden's thing to do?
Well, I think that's not going to be at the forefront of what he's trying to do. But I think Astead's point is well taken, and you're exactly right that insurrection is the backdrop for the speech. I think there's three things that Joe Biden's going to do in that speech. The first is to celebrate the progress in getting the pandemic under control, which has been his number one priority. announced the relaxation of the mask guidance today. 200 million shots in arms. Vaccination rates are rising. We're getting closer back to return to normal. Second thing is to use that success and say, I know what I'm doing. Here's a plan to get our economy back. The recovery plan, families plan, jobs plan, all of the components of that $4 trillion, and try to build momentum for that. But the third thing is to raise the stakes and say this is about showing that democracy can still work, that we can compete with autocracies like China. And this is an argument that works on a couple of levels. It accommodates the possibility that Republicans may somehow come around to participate in passing a big portion of his plan, though that's a long shot. But in the event that that does not happen, which is likely, it sets the stage for him to say to Democrats, if we're going to save democracy, it's not going to be a Republican Party whose president encouraged that insurrection and many of whose members are trying to whitewash it now. It's going to be on you, Democrats, to show that democracy can work, and he'll count on that to try to hold his party together behind some of the controversial elements of this plan.
You know, instead, there's also been a plague of police shootings of black Americans on his watch. According to a new CNN poll, most Americans, 53%, say that policing needs major changes or a complete overhaul. 32% say it needs minor changes, and only 14% say it works pretty well. This is still a big challenge.
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be a theme that continues through this. I mean, this was a challenge for his predecessor and former President Barack Obama, right? And this is going to go forward. I think what we also know is that his promises to black Americans were robust. I mean, this is a president that came in very explicitly saying that this is the community that helped put him in office and that he owes them something. And so I think that what we're going to see here when we look forward to the midterms, when we look forward to his reelection in 2024, is a black community that's saying, what did you do with that investment? That the initial kind of backing of Joe Biden was about beating Donald Trump. I talked to black voter after black voter who was thinking about electability, who was thinking about who could win, and certainly his rhetoric of unity. But it's going to be about delivering, and that includes that George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That includes the black-white wealth gap. That includes a kind of robust set of issues that the community cares about. And we say every night it's going to come up against that Senate filibuster. It's going to come up against the realities of a divided Congress. But that does not change the expectation of the people who put him in the Oval Office, who will expect for him to deliver on that.
Instead, John, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I want to turn now to the Take this, a GOP outrage machine churning out another lie in a futile attempt to dunk on Democrats. This time, Republicans promoting a bogus New York Post story that claimed with no evidence that copies of the Vice President Kamala Harris's children's book titled Superheroes Are Everywhere were given to migrant kids at the California shelter in their care packages. Okay, so the chairman of the Republican Party, that's the one spreading the lie online, asking if the VP is profiting from Biden's border crisis. And the former Trump White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, well known for his lies about crowd size, complaining the Biden White House has yet to answer for the fake story. The Post since correcting elements of the story, and CNN fact checker Daniel Dale finding that it was just one of Harris's books donated from a book drive. For the folks watching at home, do you feel like you're having deja vu? You are not. It was only last night that we talked about Republicans freaking out over a fake Biden policy to cut people's meat intake, even though no such policy existed. We did this a few weeks ago over Dr. Seuss. And who could forget the lies peddled about President Biden's health or all the COVID mistruths? This is a vicious cycle created by Republicans, with lies promoted as truths, as a way to score political points, really. And then there's the biggest lie of them all, the one that incited a deadly riot at the Capitol. The big lie that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. It didn't end in 2020. In Arizona this past week, Republicans recounted millions of ballots even though there is no evidence of widespread fraud in that state. Hours wasted to prove something that simply does not exist. Are you tired of it? It's not real, Republicans, Trumpists. The election wasn't stolen. Just stop it. It's exhausting. You're wasting your time. there's no doubt truth remains under fire from Republicans. But at a certain point, you have to accept that's how they like it. That's who they are. Lots to discuss. CNN senior political analyst John Avlon is here. CNN's political commentator Amanda Carpenter. We're going to talk about this BS next. Republicans moving on to the next big lie about the Biden administration, spreading a false story about Vice President Harris's children's book being given to migrant kids at a California shelter in their care packages. That is after they pushed bogus claims about President Biden wanting to force Americans to eat less red meat. And there's another and another and another and another. So joining me now, CNN senior political analyst John Avlon and CNN political commentator Amanda Carpenter. We have a lot to talk about. I'm going to talk about that now, so I wanted to get your thoughts on the Officer Michael Fanone interview as well. Let's start with these things and knock down some of these lies and conspiracy theories first. Good evening to both of you. Amanda, first it was Dr. Seuss, Mr. Potato Head. Now the right is spreading full-on lies about Biden and burgers, Harris and children's books. Is the GOP willing just to latch on to anything to try to smear the Biden administration? And the real question is, does it speak to how desperate they are to get something on Joe Biden, since he seems to be doing very well? Not seems to be doing, he's doing very well, and he's polling well. They're just trying to find anything, throw it against the wall, see if it sticks?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of incredible. Most of these stories, a couple of years ago wouldn't have even made it to the topics list for Fox and Friends because they're so, they're false. But they're just so incredibly frivolous. And I think this speaks to the hold that Donald Trump continues to have on the Republican Party from his golden hermit palace down in Florida, is that they really don't know how to have a policy discussion because they're still so scared of alienating him. And no one knows, Donald Trump never had a real policy agenda. So how can they actually fight the Biden administration on anything substantive when they don't know when he's going to pop up and decide to, tweet this or that? I'm surprised he's been this quiet for so long. But I really think that they are only doing these frivolous things because of that.
Yeah. John, Biden passed a nearly $2 trillion COVID relief bill. He is hitting his pledges on vaccines, working on this massive infrastructure plan. Are they doubling down on all these conspiracies and lies because they have no good answers to his policies?
They could have answers. They should have answers, but they don't have the muscle memory, right? I mean, the disinformation is so dumb, it reeks of desperation, and that's what's key here. Yeah, lies are the whole oxygen of this ecosystem. That's a given right now. But look how desperate it is to try to create these manufactured controversies out of whole cloth and hope they stick. And from Dr. Seuss on down to the, banning burgers and the nonsense about the Kamala Harris book. And look what the reporter who resigned from the New York Post said. Quote, she was ordered to write an incorrect story. And that speaks to a deeper kind of corruption, a rot that's gotten in this right now. Now, we are a deeply divided country, but they are still running that same play. But it is desperate. It is a sign of weakness. Make no mistake.
Well, listen, Amanda, we are a deeply divided country, but we don't have to be deeply divided in that way. And I think the interview with Officer Fanone showed that. But think about it. The whole reason that someone that like Officer Fanone is in the position that he is in, suffering the injuries that he suffered in the middle of a riot, is because of another big lie by Trump and the Republicans.
I know. And the party has not even come close to coming to grips for the role it played in fomenting that insurrection. I mean, you have a couple people speaking out, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, other people like me at the Bulwark, but we haven't had a real conversation. And I was so thrilled that he decided to talk to you, Don. You could tell that you earned his trust, and we're all better for it, for hearing his side of the story, because people like him have been forgotten. They were on the front lines, and it's really hard to think of how somebody like Kevin McCarthy walks into the Capitol today, past police officers who put their lives on the line, and continues to downplay this thing. And people like Senator Ron Johnson, who says it was a festive atmosphere. And you have all these MAGA mouths on other networks talking like it was no big deal. It was an extremely big deal. And I can't say enough good things about Officer Fanone, and God bless him and protect him and every man and woman like him.
John?
That's right. Hey, look, that interview was so powerful because of its authenticity, because you took the time to build a relationship, and it read, and it breaks down all these artificial divides that too often dominate our debates. You know, that he is a Capitol Hill police officer who was attacked by a mob that bought into the big lie, showing that you can be pro-cop and anti-big lie, and these things that are used to divide us are fundamentally false. They don't reflect reality and the way we live. And that's why it was so powerful.
Yeah, and he's actually with Metropolitan Police Department, but
My apologies.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. But the interesting thing, though, John, is I think that out of that interview, and I want to talk about this, is that this is a lesson for Republicans and Democrats, and more, quite frankly, I think it's a lesson for Republicans and even for law enforcement, because people sit at home, and they think because I and others have to report on what happens with law enforcement and police-involved shootings, that we are therefore anti-police, and we are not.
That's right.
What we're for is we're for the good police officers, are making police departments and policing better in America. And I think Michael Fanone is really, the poster officer for that movement. And so one can report on how police departments need to change without being anti-police, yet the folks, Amanda, who are supposedly pro-police are the ones who are saying that what happened to Officer Fanone was fake, and that it was celebratory, and that it was somehow good, or what he experienced was not real or does not exist.
Release the footage. I thought that was one of the most important things that he said, is that he wants his body camera footage released. It's his footage. It belongs to him. If he wants it out, my God, let's see it, because he said it would prove how violent that riot was. And I think that would be important. That should be consensus between Republicans and Democrats. When there's footage available of these kinds of events, put it out so we can have consensus on what happened.
Yeah, you're right. Release the footage. Metro Police, Mayor of D.C., release the footage. The public deserves it, and the officer as well, the officers. Thank you, guys. That's got to be the last word. I appreciate it.
Right,
Thank you very much. Want to dine outdoors with friends? The CDC says go for it if you've been vaccinated. New guidance from the CDC today. They say you don't need to wear a mask outside if you're vaccinated, the exception being if you're in a big crowd. The president says it's another good reason to get vaccinated.
For those who haven't gotten their vaccination yet, especially if you're younger or think you don't need it, this is another great reason to go get vaccinated now.
So let's break this down here with Aaron Bromwich, the CNN contributor and professor at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. The very smart gentleman with the very smart glasses on your screen right now. Aaron, hi. So let's go through it here. The CDC guidelines. So CDC guidelines, they're for people when they're outdoors, right? They're saying everyone can safely walk, run, bike outdoors. Are those rules essentially the same for vaccinated and unvaccinated people?
Yeah, and they've been that way for a long time. We've known that outdoor transmission is really rare, like 20 times less than indoors, maybe even much, much more than that. We've hung on to that particular guidance for such a long period of time just because the number of cases, the hospitalizations that we're seeing, they've just sort of put this full court press onto trying to control the infection rate. But, transmission outdoors, unless you're in a really tightly packed, crowded space, masks are really not needed.
Okay. All right. So now, when it came down today, I was at an outdoor place, right? And some people had masks on, others didn't. Now, if you're at a private, I don't know if maybe this is not your bailiwick. If you're in a private establishment, can they still demand that you wear a mask?
When you go into a restaurant or a bar or a shop and it's a private
Or a
establishment,
gym.
they certainly have the right. Just the same ways they can say no shirt, no shirt, no shoes, no entry. We've all got used to that. So why not with a mask?
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure. So, and if you're vaccinated, they say that you can even safely get together, dine outdoors with friends. Is the main difference that you can now do that with people outside of your own household? What's the difference here?
Yeah, so I use a slightly different guidance, but what they've put forward falls into line with what I'm doing. So in the past, where I used to wear a mask, I now don't wear a mask. So if I'm outdoors with mixed households, I don't feel the need to wear a mask because I'm vaccinated. I'm not too concerned about their status, but the outside presents a much lower risk. Where I used to avoid places in the past, such as restaurants, tightly packed shopping centers, things like that, I now will go to those and wear a mask. So the vaccination has allowed me to shift what my daily activities are, substantially, so that I can sort of re-engage into society a little bit better. So they just give me that extra buffer. So masks has come off for me in certain places, and then now I'm going into places that I wasn't in the past.
Isn't it a little bit dangerous? So I think, how do you know? How do you know who is double vaxxed or fully vaxxed? Everyone's calling it the double V's, and I'm double V'd, I'm good, right? Double vaxxed, they'll walk around and say that. But how do you know if people are double vaxxed or not?
Yeah, I mean, you don't. And so it's your own individual risk assessment that you're doing. So I look at my family. My wife and I are about the same age. We've got 2 young children in good health. The risk to our family for severe disease is really quite low. We don't mix with older people. Our grandparents live in Australia or they live in Virginia, so we don't see them very much. So our chances of being infected and then infect somebody that could have more severe outcomes is very low. So for us, we're able to take a little bit more. If you're living in a multi-generational home, you've got people that potentially could be susceptible, you do need to keep the guard up to provide that extra layer of protection. So it needs to be an assessment that each person does, and the CDC provides you with guidance on where and when, but it also needs to be an individual choice as well.
Yeah, so you still need to be careful. And I would think, listen, I'm pretty much going to wear my mask the same way that I was wearing it before for now. It's just that if I'm outdoors running or exercising or with a group of people walking or something like that, then I probably won't feel the need to wear a mask. But indoors and in restaurants, and I'll probably have the same sort of behavior until more people get vaccinated. Is that a fairly safe place to be?
And it's going to be a really confusing couple of months now as we're sort of with that vaxxed, half vaxxed, fully vaxxed side of things.
Okay.
So we're just going to look at where we are.
I got to tell you, though, in the winter months, I'm going to be wearing that mask. You know why? Because I usually get the flu every year, and I didn't get it this year.
A lot of us saw that.
And it's because of the mask. I know it, because I always get the flu, and I didn't this time. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Aaron Bromwich.
Good seeing you, Don.
And thanks for watching, everyone. Our coverage continues. Officer Michael Fanone describing to me his harrowing experience fighting for his life and fighting to stop Capitol insurrectionists on January 6th.
I mean, I experienced the most brutal, savage, hand-to-hand combat of my entire life, let alone my policing career, which spans almost 2 decades.
In less than 24 hours, President Biden will give an address from the inside of the building where Officer Fanone fought to defend. So I want to bring in now CNN's senior political correspondent, Abby Phillip. Abby, good evening. I appreciate you joining us to talk about this. I thought it was an important conversation. I hope everybody got something out of it, and they thought it was important enough as well to watch it. So you heard the officer. It's been nearly 4 months since the insurrection, but the wounds from that day still incredibly raw, and we expect that President Joe Biden will address them tomorrow when he speaks to Congress.
Yeah, and I think that, first of all, Don, an incredible interview. that is really important at a time when I think a lot of people are out here wanting to change the narrative about what happened by denying the reality of what happened on January 6th. But I think as it relates to Joe Biden, we should remember that his inauguration speech, where he really tried to appeal to a sense of national unity, he called for the other side, the other party, to basically come back to sanity in some ways. And you can't miss that in that time between then and now. It seems as though that call for a return to sanity has been largely rejected. And so it'll be interesting to see where Joe Biden takes it next. He's been very focused from a policy perspective on what he wants to accomplish. But these partisan divides, and frankly, this strain of anti-democratic, fervor that is on the right now is something that is still out there, and it hasn't gotten any better. In fact, perhaps I think a lot more people are sympathetic to the idea that there was something behind what these writers were writing about, and that's a really, I think, that should be a little bit concerning to a lot of people who care about this country and care about law and order and democracy, and don't want to see insurrections happening because people don't like the results of an election.
Listen, Abby, I know we don't have, sort of a draft of the speech, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but, he will be talking about the riot at the scene of the crime, right?
Yeah.
What do you think we're going to hear from him? Do you think he's going to set the record straight about this big lie?
In some ways, I would be surprised if he didn't talk about the fact that he's standing on a crime scene. That what happened there just months ago was something so shocking that I think a lot of people thought they would never see that in the history of this country. And I don't know, Don, to be honest, whether he's going to really lean into what happened on January 6th. But I think it's impossible to ignore it. It's impossible to paper over it. And a lot of the people who are going to be watching him might very well be people who participated in the big lie that led to it. So that's part of the reality of governing in 2021 for Joe Biden. It's one of the reasons that his agenda is having a hard time moving forward. It's not just for policy reasons. It's because there are a lot of people in Congress who are still beholden to the big lie. And in some ways, I could see him addressing that, but I also wonder if President Biden and others in the White House believe that there's really not much utility in doing that, given that Republicans are not willing to hear it. It only kind of riles up these the animosity that they have toward the other political party. I think there's been a desire among many in the White House to simply leave the partisan politics to others and deal with the governance issues.
Yeah, and just go and get their agenda across and moving. Officer Fanone is really upset with Republican officials. He spoke about it, the ones who are trying to whitewash what happened, even though they were there. The Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, is even claiming that Trump told him that he would stop the rioters. It's hard for these officers, but also it's making it hard for Joe Biden to govern, as you said. So it's a number of different things there, but they will be, you're right, Abby, they're going to be sitting there, many of the people who participated in the big lie and then said one thing about the insurrection and then voted another way, sitting there looking him right in the face, right in front of him, dead in the eye.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the reality of governing in Washington right now. It's that, President Biden is in a position, and Democrats are in a position where they have to figure out, are they able to work with the opposing party under those circumstances? And the reality of it has been, up until this point, they haven't, because there hasn't been bipartisan legislation on some of these big issues like COVID relief passed, and it's likely that the next agenda item, infrastructure, may not be bipartisan either. So the answer has really been that they have not been able to work with the other side. But, there are a lot of Democrats out there saying that there's no point in trying to paper over something as fundamental as whether other lawmakers are committed to democracy. And I think that many Democrats feel that way. They'll feel that way tomorrow, especially as they're sitting in the chamber with these folks. And the question for Joe Biden is, does he take that on head on, or does he move on to the substance of what he wants to accomplish?
Abby, I know you have a very long day tomorrow, and we'll be watching you all day and into the evening tomorrow night, so get your rest. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon.
Don.
Thank you. As the nation prepares to hear from the president, there is a wave of deadly police violence against people of color. I'm going to ask Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley about that. There she is after the break. So the President of the United States, Joe Biden, getting ready to address the nation from the exact room where rioters tried to prevent him from becoming president. The insurrection is one of many things the president is set to discuss during his first joint address to Congress tomorrow night. Joining me now to discuss, Democratic Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. Couldn't be more grateful to have you here and get your perspective on this, Congresswoman. Thanks so much for joining. So the president is delivering his first address. Yes, his first address to Congress tomorrow amid the pandemic, on the very scene of this deadly Capitol insurrection, this Capitol attack. What are you going to be listening for?
A bold vision. I'm going to be listening for what he's already demonstrated, which has been a relief after 4 years of an administration that has been cruel and corrupt and incompetent, and had contempt for everyone who calls this country home, to have an administration that leads with compassion and empathy, and one that has passed really the first federal relief package that makes the sort of bold strides necessary to meet the scale and scope of the crisis. So I have been encouraged by the investments that were made in the American Rescue Plan. I'm going to continue to push for more by executive action, canceling student debt, halting federal executions, and certainly future bold, robust relief packages that meet the scale and scope of the crisis and chart a more just path forward. The Biden-Harris administration have a bold and decisive mandate from the diverse coalition of voters that elected them. They are looking for this administration to move towards bold, systemic, structural policy change. So I'm going to be listening for that, a vision that gets us there, that's responsive to the needs of the people and responsive to the movement that made their victory possible.
Mm-hmm. And part of that, as he said, is that during his acceptance speech, where he said, Black Americans, you've had my back and now I'm going to have yours. It has been, I don't need to tell you, a brutal time for Black Americans and people who care about police violence. When you consider the numerous police shootings of Black Americans, you have Andrew Brown Jr., Daunte Wright, and others. We're just coming off the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. What do you expect to hear about that tomorrow?
Let me just stop for a moment and just be blunt and talk about how we arrived here. Black lives have not mattered. They've not mattered since the very inception of this country, the original sin of slavery. And so for that reason, because Black lives have not mattered, our humanity has never been seen. That is why our Black children are adultified. That is why our skin color is criminalized. That is why our very existence is criminalized. The Derek Chauvin verdict of guilty is one example of accountability, not justice, because true justice would mean that George Floyd would still be here with his family, with his siblings, with his children. But I can't even approximate for you, Don, because Black lives matter just that little. I don't even have the data to accurately capture how many lives have been interrupted and that have been stolen from families. Now, based on my quick assessment, since George Floyd's murder, 100 people have been murdered at the hands of law enforcement. Since the trial, 70 people have been murdered at the hands of law enforcement. So what I want to hear from this administration and from all of my colleagues at every level of government is they are committed to passing legislation. They are committed to systemic change that is going to keep Black people and other marginalized, criminalized people alive. And if, God forbid, they are murdered at the hands of law enforcement, that they will not just walk away, that they will be held accountable. And that is why I reintroduced my legislation to end qualified immunity. So what I know for sure is that no one bill is going to undo centuries of harm. I'm going to be listening for and looking for the political will and the courage and the stamina for the work that is going to be necessary to save lives. Don, I ran for Congress and have been in public service and doing the work of movement building because I am committed to the healing and liberation of Black Americans in all marginalized communities. But I can't do the work of healing and liberation if we're not alive.
Yeah. Congresswoman, thank you for your time. I'm up against the clock at the top of the hour, but as I said at the beginning when I introduced you, thank you. I always appreciate your perspective, and we'll have you back. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Andrew Brown Jr.'s family releasing their own independent autopsy report. I'm going to speak with their lawyer after this.